J'ai le plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette conférence Iran, le combat pour les droits humains et contre la peine de mort. Malgré les assurances données par le gouvernement iranien quant à une amélioration de la situation des droits humains, il semble peu probable que ces promesses se concrétisent rapidement. Le rapporteur spécial des Nations Unies sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Iran a souligné fin octobre que la priorité du gouvernement du nouveau président Hassan Rouhani de la République islamique d'Iran devrait être de réaliser davantage de progrès concrets dans le domaine des droits de l'homme et d'amender des lois incompatibles avec les engagements pris par ce pays dans ce domaine. Le rapporteur spécial a également observé que le rythme des exécutions ne semble pas s'être ralenti, les méthodes appliquées n'ont pas changé et le nombre de crimes passibles de la peine de mort reste important. Il a invité les dirigeants à envisager la libération de plusieurs centaines de militants des droits de l'homme, toujours emprisonnés. C'est aujourd'hui même que les Nations Unies vont décider sur la levée des restrictions appliquées à l'Iran en raison de son programme nucléaire et juger des progrès faits par cet État. Les relations de ce pays avec la communauté internationale et notamment avec les États-Unis s'améliorent sans doute, mais quelles sont les perspectives pour les nombreux prisonniers politiques et les condamnés à mort? Nous sommes très heureux de pouvoir accueillir au Luxembourg pour nous parler de ce thème un spécialiste en la matière et avant tout un témoin de la réalité iranienne, notre conférencier, M. Amiry Moghaddam, médecin spécialiste en sciences neurologiques et défenseur des droits de l'homme, ainsi que fondateur de l'ONG Iran Human Rights. Nous nous félicitons également de la présence de Mme Pia Oppel, journaliste de la radio 100.7, qui a bien voulu animer cette soirée. Je vous présente brièvement le déroulement de la soirée. Après une présentation de notre conférencier par Mme Pia Oppel, notre intervenant vous parlera pendant 45 minutes de la situation actuelle des droits humains en Iran. Mme Oppel enchaînera un débat de 25 minutes avec lui. Ensuite, le public, cela veut dire vous, pourra intervenir dans une séance questions-réponses qui durera à peu près 30 minutes. Comme vous avez pu lire, la conférence est en anglais et j'espère que vos écouteurs marcheront bien. Je pense que cette soirée sera pour nous une source d'information et de réflexion, de même qu'une motivation de continuer dans nos actions pour le respect des droits humains en Iran. Merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce our guest with just a few brief biographical notes. Mahmoud Amiry, pardon, it's better like this? Okay. Mahmoud Amiry Moghaddam is, as you probably know, the co-founder of Iran Human Rights that started as a network in 2005 and is based in Oslo. Today, he is the international spokesperson for this NGO. For his work against human rights violations in Iran, Amiry Moghaddam received the Norwegian Amnesty International's Human Rights Prize in 2007. His link to Iran is a very personal one. Amiry Moghaddam was born there and has lived the first years of his life in the city of Kerman, a town that is about 1,000 kilometers southeast of Tehran, which in the 1970s had about twice as many citizens as Luxembourg City has today. In an interview, Amiry Moghaddam once said that he remembers the revolution of '79 very well. He was a second grader, and like the other neighborhood kids, he was paying very close attention to what was going on. In this interview, he mentioned a fearful atmosphere that he felt had infiltrated every aspect of the Iranian society after the revolution. This impression also has a very personal aspect to it. As Amiry Moghaddam explained to his interview partner, his 18-year-old cousin was executed because he sympathized with the opposition during that time. In 1983, he and his siblings fled across the Pakistani border, and then in 1985, because the situation there wasn't safe enough as well, they arrived in Norway. 11 years after that, he completed his medical studies in the University of Oslo, and then obtained a PhD at the Center of Neuroscience and Molecular Biology. He was awarded for all this work first the Norwegian King's Gold Medal for the best medical doctorate at the University of Oslo, and then the Anders Jahre Medicine Prize for Young Scientists in 2008. Today he works as a professor in medicine and is the head of the Laboratory of Molecular Neuroscience at the University of Oslo. That he would make such a brilliant career was not so evident when he arrived in Norway. As a teenager, he refused, as he just told me before the conference, to go to school for about 2 years because he didn't feel able to adapt to the carefree life that his peer appeared to live. Actually, already back then, he started petitions against human rights violations in Iran. Amiry Moghaddam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you ACAT and Amnesty Luxembourg for inviting me here, and thanks to all of you who are here today so that we can speak about human rights situation in Iran together. Unfortunately, human rights are not always on top of the agenda when different leaders or countries meet to speak about Iran, but today we put it on top of our agenda. I will speak about human rights situation, but before that, just look at this girl. Some of you probably have seen this picture, and those who haven't, try to imagine what she's thinking. As it was said, Iran Human Rights is a human rights NGO, politically independent, and we are also a member of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. So what I'm going to do today is to touch upon some aspects of the human rights violations in Iran, then focus more on the death penalty, and then speak a little bit about the situation right now after the last presidential elections and what we can do. So, human rights in Iran are violated as a result of the law, or according to the law, because the law permits human rights violations, but also due to the lawlessness that you find in every dictatorship. So if we start with the human rights violations according to the law, look at the democracy. So power structure in Iran, according to the Iranian law, implies lack of democracy, and as the supreme leader, who is not elected by the people, has basically all the power. So he can appoint directly the head of the broadcasting, head of the Revolutionary Guards and the military forces, head of the judiciary, and then a guardian council, a council of 12 men who are directly or indirectly appointed by him, and they decide who can run for presidency or for the parliament. So all those who are candidates in Iran for the presidential position or for the parliament, they have to be approved by the guardian council or indirectly by the supreme leader. So when you listen to the radio talking about Iran, all the focus is on this little area down here, the president, while very little is said about the person who has the real power. So, and here is basically the powers who are governing Iran, who decide on the major aspects of Iranian politics, both the nuclear program, the major foreign policy, and the human. Ali Khamenei is the, here you see heads of the Revolutionary Guards. If we go further in the Iranian law and look at what other kind of human rights violations the law permits, I think it is enough to look at Article 233 of the new Iranian Penal Code. It is about homosexuality or homosexual relations. It says that, in this article only, you can see discrimination based on the sexual orientation, discrimination based on religion, torture, and death penalty. Only in one article. So here it said, the person who played an active role in sodomy will be flogged, lashed 100 times. That is torture. But the one who played a passive role will be sentenced to death, regardless of his marriage status. So the active 100 lashes, the passive will be executed. But if the active part is a non-Muslim, then both of them will be executed. So here is discrimination based on religion. So we have death penalty for sexual orientation, flogging, and discrimination. The same is, of course, for women, but they will get 100 lashes. So this is an example of human rights violations by law in Iran. Another example is gender apartheid, women's rights. So according to the Iranian law, a woman's testimony is valued half of a man's in a court. So you need two female witnesses for one man. The same is the value of life. According to, if somebody is killed, the person who, let's say by an accident, the person who is responsible has to pay blood money. If a woman is killed, her life is valued as half of a man's. This is again in the law. The same is when it comes to transmission of citizenship, inheritance, and so on. Recently, the law just adopted, the Iranian parliament adopted a new law allowing men to marry their adopted girl children as young as 13 years of age. Before this law, for a man, it is allowed to have 4 wives and unlimited number of temporary marriages. A temporary marriage is a marriage that you can, it can last from days, maybe even hours, to many years. But for a woman who is married, if she has relationship with another man, she can be sentenced to death for adultery. And the punishment is stoning. If we look at other sides of a woman's, now we are just looking at the law. A woman cannot be a judge, and a woman cannot run for the presidency, cannot be president. And recently, they have tried to reduce their access to the universities. So there are 77 fields of study in certain universities where females cannot participate. So again, the law violates women's rights. The dress code is regulated. If you go to Iran, you will see that many women break these dress codes. You see many women, especially in big towns, that do not respect it. But every now and then, these women are arrested, and they can be punished. They can be from warnings to fines to lashing. This is a private picture we got a few years ago. A teenager was in a park, her ankles were visible, and she was lashed. I don't remember how many times. But again, this is done according to the law. Lashing or flogging is a torture. This is an Iranian activist who was arrested, Peyman Aref, and before being released, he was also flogged. So torture is permitted. And that's how it happens. This is a picture from a public amputation in the city of Shiraz earlier this year. We don't show the whole picture, but here they amputated the 4 fingers of this man's right hand. And it happens publicly. And this is also according to the law. In the international law, according to United Nations or human rights declarations, this is torture. But it's legal. When it comes to religious minorities, some religious minorities are persecuted according to the law, and some because of the lawless nature of the system. Christians are supposed to be able to practice their religion. However, if they are if they have converted from Islam, that's completely different story and can be punished. As of July 2013, there are 20 Christians in custody in Iran, and in the recent years, 300 have been arrested, many of them in the churches that they have at home. Baha'is, at least according to the UN Special Rapporteur, Ahmad Shahid's report this year, at least 109 Baha'is are in prison in Iran. Baha'is are not, as far as I know, are not recognized as a religion. So that's why they can't be convicted of apostasy. But what the Iranian authorities do is that they use charges such as espionage or acts against the security to arrest them, although they don't have any evidence for that. Again, this is lawlessness. Iran's biggest religious minority, the Sunni Muslims, they are probably one of the biggest groups that are discriminated, persecuted, and don't get so much attention. They live mainly in areas with ethnic minorities in southwest among the Iranian Arabs, Kurds, Azeris, and Baluch. At least 4 Sunni Kurds are at imminent danger of execution in a prison near Tehran. They are charged with terrorism, or what's called muharebe, fighting against God. But what they actually have done is, according to their own testimony, religious activities, no violence. So since we are talking about being sentenced to death, when it comes to the death penalty, Iranian Penal Code considers crimes that not meet definition of the most serious under international law to be capital offenses and sentenced to death. As you know, according to the international law, death penalty is not forbidden, but it's supposed to be given only for the most serious crimes. But in Iran, we have it for adultery, for drug trafficking, homosexual acts, alcohol consumption for the 4th time, and insulting Islamic prophets. Iran has also death penalty for juvenile offenders. In September this year, a boy was executed in southern Iran for a crime committed at the age of 14. So it's still going on, also under the new president. Stoning is still a method of execution according to the new penal code. If you look at the execution patterns in the last 8 years, we see that it has been increasing, especially after the 2009. Part of this increase could be due to the fact that there are more human rights groups focusing on the death penalty, that it is possible to get more information about secret executions, but part of it is also because of a real increase. So last year, Iran Human Rights could confirm 580 executions in Iran. About half of them were officially announced, and half were secret executions that we managed to confirm by 2 different sources. But beside that, we received 240 execution reports that we haven't managed to confirm, so we haven't included in the So the real number is probably much higher than what we publish or what human rights organizations publish, because of the lack of transparency in the Iranian judiciary. So if you think about who is sentenced to death or executed, this is the picture from last year. 3/4 of all executions were due to drug-related charges. Then we have rape and sexual assault, 8%. Muharebe, war against God, I will come back to it, for 5%, and then murder, and 7% unknown. So, as you see, most of those executed were charged for common crimes. If you look at those who are sentenced to death for drug-related charges, this is Saeed Sadiqi. Since our organization publishes numbers, sometimes I think it's important to think that behind each of these numbers there is a human being with a specific personal history, with family members, just like us. When I say 580, so there are 580 unique stories, unique human beings. Unfortunately, we don't know the stories of most of them. Saeed Sadiqi is one of the few sentenced to death for drug-related charges who was executed on the 10th of October, the International Day Against Death Penalty in 2012. He was arrested and charged for trafficking drug from one part of the city to another part. According to himself, he was given money to transport certain items that he thought was going to use for building a building, you know. And when he was, he was caught and they found drugs, and according to him, it was not his. He was not going to sell them. He had not been buying them. He was tortured for 2 weeks until he accepted the charges. He spoke to his lawyer only 15 minutes before the court and under the trial, which lasted for about 15 to 20 minutes, and he was sentenced to death. Since we received his story before his execution, several human rights groups, they started a campaign. His execution was postponed for some days, but he was executed anyway. Saeed is only one example. About 70 to 80% of all those executed for drug charges, they are identified only by their initials, or they are not identified at all. We don't know who they are. In Iran, a person can be, who is charged with possession of 30 grams of certain narcotics can be sentenced to death. They don't have the right to appeal their death sentence. Iranian authorities blame the war against drug trafficking for these executions, because United Nations has an ongoing cooperation with Iran in fighting drug trafficking, because Iran is on the transit route between Afghanistan and Europe. So This is Mr. Larijani, who is Secretary General of Iranian Supreme Council for Human Rights, who says to a TV channel that the reason why the executions are so high is because most of them are traffickers who want to traffic drugs from Afghanistan to Europe. If Europe wants to prevent drug trafficking, they have to participate in this fight. But we can close our eyes and let the traffickers go through Iran to Europe, and in that way the number of executions will also decrease. That's what he says. So basically he's blaming you for 74% of the executions in Iran. And the reason why he can do that is because actually United Nations is cooperating with Iran. Several European countries, Western countries, who have abolished death penalty in their own countries, they are supporting this program, and part of this program leads indirectly to more executions. United Kingdom, Denmark, Ireland, and Norway, they have stopped supporting that specific program because of its connection to the executions. But there are still some countries. We have asked UN to very clearly put conditions. If they want to cooperate in fighting drug trafficking, then they must be given a guarantee that those arrested will not be executed. The UNODC says that it's the donor countries who decide. So we have to find the donors and tell them. I mentioned Muharebe, war against God. It's a term that was introduced in the Iranian law early 80s. At that time, it was used against those who were involved in armed struggle against the Iranian authorities. But later it has changed. So people associated with such groups are also often charged with Muharebe. Often there is an over-representation of ethnic groups like Ahwazi Arabs, Sunni Kurds, or Baluchis. Habibullah Gol Paripur was executed on 26th of October this year, less than a month ago, without any information to his lawyer or family. He was sentenced to death for Muharebe, war against God, through membership or taking part in terrorist acts. But when we look at the court sentence, this is from his court, the only evidence they have is that he was entering the country carrying, according to here, hundreds of books belonging to a group, to a banned group. So he was not carrying any arms. There is no evidence that he was involved in any armed activities or violence. He was carrying books, and he was executed for that. This is according to the court sentence. Those who can read Farsi see what it is. It looks like an advertisement, right? And it is. It is written, ceremony of implementation of the execution of a drug smuggler, Wednesday at 4 p.m. at Ramadan Street in Ahvaz. Execution of for armed robbery, and the Moghaddam, a person who had been fighting against God. Time, Saturday, 4 p.m., Naderi crossing. It's as if you were going to announce any event or showing a movie, and they make sure that as many people as possible come and watch this. I'm sorry for showing this picture. This is on 16th of April in Shiraz. You have heard about Shiraz. One of Iran's most beautiful cities and a tourist attraction. On this day, Iranian authorities, they executed 6 people in order to make as many people as possible see the executions. The executions took place at 3 different spots of the city and 3 different times. So it was early in the morning, midday, and afternoon. So they insist that as many as possible watches this. I'm very sorry for showing this. These are some people watching these executions. You see the faces. Some are crying. Look at this boy. Look at this little girl. Or these. Look at their faces. She was just coming back from school and stopped there. And this is the little girl that we saw. This is from a children's book. What is going on? Sorry, there will be 2 more pictures of executions. I think there is a cultural war going on. Mr. Khamenei, Iranian supreme leader, used to say that there is a cultural war. There is actually. This is a way to normalize death penalty. That nobody asks the question, why having this inhumane, degrading punishment for a human being? When you grow up with this punishment as if it was the most normal thing in the life, then you don't ask question, and you make the authorities' job easier. What are these children looking at? Actually, the little girl we saw was looking at this scene. Some of these executions happen this way, some this way. Here the person is standing on the ground and pulled slowly up. Sometimes it takes up to 15 to 20 minutes till the person dies. This is torture, according to also international definitions. We have been told that actually they decide whether they want the person to die this way or the faster way. They also do it in the prison the same way. Whether they put this back or in the front, it decides how fast the person dies. So deliberately they do it. We say that these acts promote a culture of violence in the country. Here another one. They were more creative. It's called Freedom Square in Kermanshah, a city west of Iran. These 3 men were standing on the bus and hung from the bridge, and the buses drove. and they died. Actually, last week we heard this news. A 7-year-old boy died while playing the execution game. He tied the rope where his mother used to hang the clothes around his neck and stood on one of his cars. He was alone, so pulled away the car and he actually died. So this is an Iranian newspaper in Iran. We had a similar story a couple of months ago. Few children were playing together the execution game. So, why so many executions in Iran? What is the aim? Iranian authorities, they say that they use death penalty to counteract crimes, to fight the crimes. There is no scientific documents, there is no documentation showing that death penalty actually leads to less crime. The opposite has been shown in some states. But why do they do it? Several years we have had the suspicion that, or we have suggested that the Iranian authorities use death penalty to spread fear among the society, among the people. This year we made an analysis of number of executions in relation with political events. So here you see the red shows the number of executions. Sometimes you have the peaks, sometimes you have very low numbers. And major political events. The black ones show elections, like parliamentary or presidential elections. The green line show when the authorities expect unrest or protests. This is normally anniversary of the student uprising. So as you see, when we have elections in Iran, it means that the international community are focused on what is going inside Iran. Foreign journalists travel to Iran, and maybe they want to encourage the people to come and vote. You see, number of executions are very low. The same was this year. In June, there were very few number of executions. For about 2 weeks before election, there was no execution at all. But when they expect uprisings, like, you know, there is always a peak. This one was much higher because this is the 2009 elections, which resulted into protests. And right after that, we had the highest monthly execution numbers. So we find a meaningful relation between number of executions and the political events in Iran. We have done the analysis for the last 10 years. We find the same. So despite the fact that most of those executed are sentenced to death for common crimes, like drug trafficking or murder or sexual abuse, the purpose seems to be political. The aim, we don't believe that the aim is to fight the crime. We think that the aim is to spread fear among the society. So, in the last part, I want to say a few words about what happened after the presidential elections. Everybody is talking about Iran has become much better. A new president who doesn't threaten different countries to remove them from the map every second day, or doesn't deny Holocaust directly. And he also has a tweet account, Hassan Rouhani. He has a foreign minister who is in Geneva now, who speaks fluently English. He seems pretty nice. I think he's a charming man. Not only he tweets, he also uses Facebook. And we have a justice minister involved in the mass execution of thousands of political prisoners in 1988. He doesn't tweet and doesn't use Facebook, and he doesn't communicate with the Western countries. This list by itself made us think, why did Mr. Rouhani pick him as his justice minister? There are few people who are directly linked to the mass execution of thousands of prisoners in 1988. This has been characterized as crimes against humanity. This person, if the situation changed, he can be charged with crimes against humanity. Why is he chosen as the justice minister? And this one as a foreign minister who is, I mean, why not all of them are like that, using Facebook and Twitter and smile and talk nice to people? I don't know. But what we know are the facts that from 3 days after the elections until 7th of November, 312 people are executed in Iran. 184 of them officially announced. Even to be Iran, it is a very high number. In about 4 months, we should also keep in mind that we had month of Ramadan in between. Normally there are no executions in Ramadan. So in 3.5 months, 312 executions. If we only look at the official numbers, so it's 50 to 60 people every month, officially. This is high, even according to Iran standards. If we look at a diagram looking at executions from January until October, here is the presidential election. This is the Iranian New Year month. There is a clear increase in the number of executions in Iran since the presidential election. So the fact that we still hear that situation has become better, it doesn't refer to the situation of people inside Iran. It refers to the situation in one of these meeting rooms in Geneva. There, of course, it has become better. There is finally someone with whom you can talk. But as a human rights organization, we say it clearly and we underline that the situation of human rights has not been improved since the presidential election and the election of Mr. Rouhani. About 40 political prisoners were released or pardoned. Most of them were at the end of their prison term. And we welcome that, but that's all. Our main indicator for the human rights situation is the death penalty, and this has become much worse. In the same period, we have had execution of minors the 14-year-old boy, I said, the person who had committed a murder at the age of 14, he was 18 when he was executed in Kazerun. We have had execution of political prisoners. Normally these would lead to massive international protests. When Iran executes minors, normally European Union and Norway, where I live, normally they protest. Sometimes they summon the ambassador to the foreign ministry. Sometimes they publish a public announcement, a statement. This year nothing happened. So what we tell the international community is that you should, if you want long-lasting peace and stability, you should not close your eyes towards the human rights situation in Iran. Unfortunately, all the focus has been directed to the nuclear issue. I don't say it is not important, but what is very dangerous is when Iranian authorities execute 2 to 3 persons every day and the world community doesn't react. This is taken as a positive, as a green light by the Iranian authorities. So we urge international community, European Union, any country with dialogue with Iran, that human rights situation and the death penalty should be at the top of the agenda in your dialogue with Iran. This is good for the Iranian people. This is good for eventual possible reforms, and on the long run, it is good for the peace and stability in the region. We should remember that a democratic Iran that respects its people's rights will never pose threat to neighboring countries. And we have also seen that international community have put human rights on the agenda when it comes to countries like South Africa and Myanmar, Burma. And it gave results. South Africa had a nuclear issue, but the main focus was apartheid. And when apartheid disappeared, nuclear issue also disappeared. I think I stop here. Thank you very much.
Does it work? Yes. Thanks a lot for this very interesting expose that you gave. With the questions I wanted to ask, I wanted to focus on where you see a potential for the situation to improve in Iran. When I get what you were trying to tell us is that Mr. Rouhani as such is not bringing so much hope. Where do you see, maybe inside Iran, the dynamics, potentials for a change?
I think that actually there was lots of hope in Iran. You know, many people went and actually voted for Mr. Rouhani, not because Mr. Rouhani was known as a reformist. He wasn't so well known among the Iranian people, you know. before he promised reforms, and that's when many people went and voted for him. So the hope was there, and that's very positive. That's where I see the potential, because Iranian authority, or the supreme leader, Mr. Khamenei, he thought that 4 years of very harsh crackdown has taken away all the hope and the energy from the young Iranians. So when they saw young Iranian boys and girls dancing on the street after 4 years of suppression, I think he understood that situation is dangerous. And I think Iranian people saw some hope. But this is a potential. The potential, I think that any positive change in Iran will happen by the Iranian people, by the young boys and girls who were on the streets both 4 years ago and this summer. But they need our support. So this is the right moment. If the international community wants to promote human rights in Iran, this is the right moment. Iranian authorities are very sensitive to international pressure right now. So this pressure should be canalized towards better human rights.
But there seems to be a contradiction between what you're saying, that Iran is very sensitive to these questions. If you make the relation between the numbers of people being executed and the election of Mr. Rouhani, it goes in very different directions. So do you have an explanation for this trend?
Yeah, I think that the main explanation is that after Mr. Rouhani was elected, almost all the focus has been away from the negative sides of the human rights situation in Iran. When 11 prisoners were released, we saw the news everywhere, all over the world. When 18 prisoners were executed, I think the time distance wasn't so long, and some of them were political. I didn't see the news so many places. So I think the focus has been away from the human rights violations, and that's why they continue. But we have one example that actually international attention helped. You remember there was a man who was hanged, but he didn't die. So they found him alive the day after in the cold room. So the judge wanted to execute him again. But then the news came out, and this led to reactions from the international communities. We know about European countries that discussed it with Iran. And only 1 day later, Mr. Mohammadi, who is not known for his fight for human rights, he said that this man should not be executed because his execution is not good for the Islamic Republic's reputation internationally. So now after 4 years, they care about the reputation, and this is important.
I guess we should come back to the outside pressures that exist and potential you see in them. What about inside pressure? The green movement that has had gotten a lot of attention internationally. Has it been crushed successfully?
Well, I think most of the people who went on the streets and voted for Mr. Rouhani had previously voted for Mousavi or Karoubi. I think that many of them were parts of the Green movement. I don't think they are crushed, and that's one of the reasons why we see so many executions in Iran. Because Mr. Khamenei doesn't think that the Green movement is crushed, or the Iranian youth are crushed. So that's why they continue these executions. But again, if you remember the 2009 protests and also the vote this year, you see that the Iranian civil society is still very peaceful. There is not so much violence in their protests. And this is pretty unique in the Middle East right now, if you look in the countries around. This is yet another reason why I think that the Western countries and the international community should give more attention to this civil society, should give it more support. Because we never know how long this continues. Children who are growing up by watching public executions, I'm not sure how peaceful they are going to be.
What do you think are the changes that the new president can or will or wants to prioritize, and what can you do in this, I think the word is nizam, is that right? It actually describes the system that you have shown in the beginning, with the supreme leader actually being above all the other parts of the political system. How much scope for actually putting any priorities is there for a new president?
It's a very good question, because what he can do and what he will do and what he wants to do, I think all three of them could be completely different. Mr. Rouhani promised that, at least that's the way people who voted for him understood, that he's going to release political prisoners. That Mr. Mousavi, Mrs. Rahnavard, and Mr. Karoubi, the presidential candidates from the last term, that they were going to be released. He promised that. People who have voted for Mr. Rouhani expect him to follow up his promises. He also promised, or he mentioned several times about freedom of expression, freedom of information. He himself uses a Twitter that is banned in Iran. His foreign minister uses Facebook that is banned or filtered. But they have promised this. So this is what we expect from them. Whether they will do it or not, this is another question. If they want to do it, they can do it. Because we should remember, Mr. Khamenei, or the Nizam, the establishment, is at its weakest now. That's why they accept phone calls from Obama. So this is the time that you can actually use the popular support. Rouhani can use the votes he got as a pressure, as a means of pressure towards the supreme leader. And it doesn't need to be violent. Just by mentioning it, you know, when Mr. Khamenei sees 1 million people on the street, he understands that he can't kill all of them. So I think Mr. Rouhani has to use, he is obliged to use the votes he got in order to promote the human rights, to keep his promises. But I think international community plays also an important role. International community should remind Rouhani about his promises and not condition everything only to the nuclear issue. If the international community gives 100% focus to the nuclear issue, the best they can get is a temporary agreement on the nuclear issue. That's the best they can get. And that's not good enough. Because a country where the establishment doesn't have support among the people, will always potentially pose a threat also to the world outside.
I promise it's the last question about inside forces that can be part of the change. What about journalists in Iran? I guess the new president will have to get rid of the legacy that comes from Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's presidency. It started there that the numbers of journalists that actually were in jail started to rise deeply suddenly, and the executions actually as well rose during his presidency. What do you think will be Mr. Wani's activity in that part?
Well, we hope that, well, so far, you know, he gave many promises. But so far, when it comes to the journalists, we know that at least one newspaper has been shut down as a direct order of the government. Except the 40 who were released from the time after elections, we haven't seen more improvement in release of the prisoners, but we still are hopeful. When it comes to the executions, of course, it's even worse. So if it continues this way, they will reach a new record. He will break the record under Ahmadinejad.
To get to the pressure that comes from outside, there was a resolution voted yesterday in the UN committee that is based on the report that you mentioned as well from the special rapporteur that has made an in-depth analysis of the human rights situation in Iran. It was adopted with 83 votes in favor, Luxembourg among them, 62 abstentions, which is quite a lot as well, 36 against, among them Russia and China. This resolution will come in front of the General Assembly in December, probably. What do you think is the impact this discussion can have? Will it be in the media? Will it have an impact?
We are actually very concerned about how the international community will continue its votes, because we think it's very important that the international community, United Nations, they continue monitoring the human rights situation, and they continue the mandate of the special rapporteur. But we also know that Iranian authorities will try to remove this mandate. They did it during time of President Khatami. That was the first time that the special rapporteur was removed from Iran. And at that time, Iran started, they traded with Europe. They said that we start a human rights dialogue with EU, but then remove the special rapporteur. That was the result. The human rights dialogue didn't result in so many improvements. So I hope that it doesn't happen this time, that the European countries especially, but all the countries who have voted yes to continue this mandate, to continue this focus on human rights, they vote again yes, and more countries join, because this is the time focus on human rights can actually give a result. And this is a time that we can miss a huge opportunity if we stop focusing on human rights.
What do you think about the answer that Iran gave to the draft of the report? There were more or less encouraging reactions in their answer. One was that something that you mentioned as well, that they said all punishments and discriminations in Iran are actually based on laws that have been established in a democratic way, so they have a nice argument for Western democracies to answer to. And then the other, perhaps more encouraging reaction is that they actually stated that they want to give civil society more opportunities to engage into the whole process of the review of the human rights situations. So How do you feel about the answer?
So far, what we see is that the rhetoric is changed. Probably the same persons wrote the answers, but the words they choose are changed. But it doesn't mean that the action will change at all. The special rapporteur is asking for one very simple thing. Let me enter the country. That's all they are asking, actually. And if Iranian authorities, if the new president or the person who has written the answers really want to show a positive side or wants to start a positive engagement with the international community, as a first step should let the special rapporteur, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, enter Iran and examine all these reports that he has been writing. Unfortunately, I don't see any difference. I actually read the Iranian authorities' reaction. It's almost identical to Mr. Ahmadinejad's answer. Almost identical.
There is one thing that the authorities mentioned as well is are the sanctions that are on Iran, and actually they argue that the sanctions are the first point where human rights violations start. What do you answer to this argument made by the Iranian authorities?
You know, issue of sanctions is always difficult because as a human rights organization, we don't like sanctions that affect ordinary people's lives. We are not for sanctions that lead to lack of medication at the Iranian hospitals. We are for sanctions that are focused on those who are involved in the human rights violations, who aim at the establishment. I think one of the reasons why we see this turn in the rhetorics of the Iranian authorities is because the sanctions are actually they are tough. The Iranian authorities, they feel the sanctions. And I think Mr. Rouhani's first task is to improve relations with West in order to remove the sanctions. And I think that conditioning it to the Iranian people's situation and their rights is very important. That, you know, today Iranian authorities, they use sanctions as a, you know, as a propaganda, saying that, okay, the West is punishing you. I think if the focus on Iran was conditioned on situation of the human rights, they couldn't use it in this way. And again, I again think that it's very important to remove sanctions that are affecting people, most of all like medication. But when it comes to the political pressure, the pressure on the system, it should be conditioned to improvement of Iranian people's situation.
But what you're asking is actually the thing that is currently not happening, if I understand it. All the discussions about the nuclear program, it's a lot of talking about how much uranium should be used for this and that, but it's not at all about human rights. Is that correct? And what do you say about this?
Unfortunately, it seems so, and I think it's a very big mistake if the international community, the P5+1, think that, okay, this time we close our eyes to the human rights abuses until we come to an agreement, and think that Mr. Rouhani will have more space, more space for maneuver if he manages a deal. I think it's completely wrong. I think they should start focusing on human rights immediately. if they want a long-term solution, they should remember that it's not Iranian authorities who dictate the framework of these talks. It's the international community that should dictate the frameworks, and it should be based on the Iranian people's rights. I think, well, I'm talking on behalf of Iran human rights, on behalf of the human rights defenders that I know, all of us, like 25 NGOs yesterday wrote a letter to United Nations members saying that you should put human rights on the agenda. So Iranian civil society wants P5+1 to focus, not only P5+1, but also the international community to focus on the human rights situation.
But with China and Russia voting already against the resolution in the committee, this seems to be a very complicated issue to touch upon right now.
Well, it's always complicated to touch upon human rights when you are talking with China and Russia. So, but what is, I mean, I think most of us expect that China and Russia will have another approach. But what we don't expect is that Western European countries they don't include human rights in their approach.
One last question from my part would be, actually you criticized a little bit in the beginning that we in the media in the West focus on the little part, new president, new Iran, we have a parliamentary vote, and all the rest we kind of ignore it. What is, you think, a message for how media attention should work in Europe?
Well, I just made a statement. You know, I don't expect that people know, you know, in detail the political system in Iran. But it's my duty to try to make it clear. I think that media plays a very important role. Media actually can change the game, especially in democratic countries like, let's say, Western Europe, like even Luxembourg. You know, an international voice in the present situation can make a huge difference. So, a journalist who tries to focus on this issue, who challenges the European authorities, ministers, asking them, why aren't you protesting against the execution of minors? You used to do it until last year. Me, as a spokesperson for Iran human rights, during time of Ahmadinejad, I used to be contacted almost every day because it was in. And I was very happy for that because we want the human rights to be on top of the agenda. I think the same should happen now because human rights haven't changed. And journalists, you have an exceptional opportunity to influence this scene.
Thanks, Dad. So I would give my microphone to the floor.
Thank you very much. Very close to the presentation.
Beaucoup plus proche.
Okay, I'm not... Thank you very much.
Very close to the
presentation.
Beaucoup plus proche.
Okay, I'm not used to it.
It's for the translator, please.
I think the presentation, even though I'm against most of the protocols that you mentioned, but actually what we have heard in Europe and what we hear from America, medication and food is not a part of the sanctions. And you telling us that is a part of the sanctions. Who shouldn't believe it?
Shall I answer? I didn't say it's part of the sanctions. I say that we are not for any sanctions that affect medication. We have asked European Union. They say that it's not part of the sanctions, but what they also we hear from Iran is that the medication is what has become very expensive, or some of it you can't find in the country. Some people say it has got to do with sanctions on the banks, that the money transfer doesn't make it possible. I don't know. But as a general concept, I say that we are not for a sanction that leads to lack of medication. So if the problem is the banking system, probably it's not difficult to solve it. If medication is part of the sanction, which I don't believe is, then it should be solved.
When it is conditional, your statement.
Yes.
Hi, and thank you for your comprehensive compilation of this information. I think it's really valuable to somehow raise consciousness about human rights in Iran. Just
Leute, please.
don't you hear me?
No, the translator must hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just want to make a complimentary point about the inhumane laws that you mentioned at the beginning. I think it should be mentioned that these laws don't come out of blue. They didn't invent these laws themselves. These are very texts of Quran. These are Islamic laws. And I think this should be mentioned. Otherwise, we would be power can make us somehow politically correct, but it's hypocritical. And I think I wanted to ask you, what's your point about this? What's your take about this? That we are dealing with an ideological, religious dictatorship, not a conventional.
Shall I answer it? This is right. Iranian, the penal code is called Iranian Islamic Penal Code. That's right. But we should remember one thing, that if they really wanted, also according to the Shia Islam, they can use part of it and not part of it. They have done it in other cases. For example, the interest in banking. According to Sharia, you are not supposed to have interest, but they have removed it and they have managed. So if that's practical, then removing stoning and amputation should also be more practical. So I blame them as the system, and I think that not all Muslim countries are, if you look at the countries around, not all Muslim countries are amputating or stoning, or so that's why I wouldn't go that far. The fact that Iranian regime is an ideological religious dictator, I would say that it's a totalitarian regime that uses religion, right, as an ideology. But not everything they do is ideological. If it is not in their interest, they just don't do it. It's not Taliban that, start shooting the statue of Buddha, or give a safe haven to Bin Laden. And if Bin Laden had been in Tehran after 9/11, Mr. Khamenei would have given him directly to Bush. no doubt about that. Because they care about survival of their system. They are not acting out of ideology. If you remember Ayatollah Khomeini talking about the war with Iraq, that it is the holiest that we have, and suddenly he said, okay, ceasefire, it's not good for our system.
Avant de poser ma question, je voudrais juste signaler que ceux qui veulent poser des questions en français, n'hésitent pas, je traduirai pour notre intervenant. My question is, you have been conducting your admirable and courageous campaign from Norway. Is it possible to do this kind of work at all in Iran? I mean, could you visit Iran? Could you envisage visiting Iran? And what about your correspondents in Iran? Are they in permanent danger if they send you information?
Well, human rights activities, the activities that we do, let's say, working against the death penalty, documentation, publishing information about human rights violations, they can be charged, from propaganda and lies against the Islamic Republic, which is one charge, to acts against national security. Even more serious, it could be espionage, and which is very serious. So it is dangerous. It is very dangerous. But there are people inside Iran that we work with, and also other groups are working with. There is a big civil society which is not allowed to, whose activity is not permitted, but they are working. Yeah. And whether I can travel to Iran, I haven't tried, and I will wait a little bit.
Merci Patrick. Ça marche? Oui. Oui, je préfère en français, ce sera plus facile. Je voulais rebondir un peu sur la question de Patrick. J'aimerais savoir comment les Iraniens, la population iranienne, perçoit ce qui se fait au niveau international pour eux, pour la défense des droits de l'homme dans le monde. Comme les médias sont tenus par le pouvoir, qu'est-ce qui arrive à la population de ce qui est fait pour eux dans le monde?
So, if your question is about how much Iranian people know about what's going on outside, I think they know a lot. Even though there is censorship and filtering on the internet, almost all Iranians have anti-filter proxies, and parabol antennas. Almost everyone has it. They come and remove them, and then they buy new ones. And so I think Iranian, at least in the big cities, they are very well informed, and that's also one of the problems, because the Iranian authorities' dream would be to have a country like Northern Korea, completely closed, where people don't have access to any information. But I think they know that they can't reach that goal.
Bonsoir, merci pour être venu. Merci pour Amnesty International pour cette fois. Comme vous savez, ce 1er septembre, ils sont le gouvernement de Maliki. Ils sont attaqués dans le camp Achab et exécution de 50 personnes, 7 otages.
Vous pourriez répéter, s'il vous plaît? Merci. Non, ça passe, il faut juste parler fort et clairement, doucement.
Et doucement. Comme vous savez,
c'est au 1er septembre, le gouvernement de Malaisie et là, ils ont attaqué le camp Ashraf et exécuté de 52 personnes.
Executed 52 people, attacked Camp Ashraf.
That's right. You can understand better than I can.
Yes.
Et nous avons de 7 otages là.
We have
7 hostages.
7 hostages.
7 otages là. Jusqu'à aujourd'hui, de 81 jours, que plus ou moins de 200 personnes qui sont grève à manger.
Hunger strike.
Grève de la faim.
Yeah, grève de la faim.
Amnesty International, il y a beaucoup de fois, ils sont donnés de comprendre que 7 condamnés de 7 crimes. Je voudrais savoir que votre idée est d'accord.
Est-ce que vous pouvez le dire en farsi?
Oui.
Ce serait plus facile.
C'est plus facile pour tout le monde. ببخشید نظر شما رو می‌خواستم در مورد حمله به اشرف که 52 تا دست بسته اعلام کردن و خارج از این جنایتی که تو ایران میشه نیست می‌خواستم سر اون بدونم و اینکه به حساب نظر شما اینکه چرا دولت‌ها باید قوی‌تر برخورد کنن و نمی‌کنن با این کار چیه؟ خیلی
جواب which language shall I respond? فارسی بگم یا
You can say a few words in Farsi, but the English.
if I say English, is it okay? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thank you. Iran Human Rights, the organization that I represent, we condemned strongly the attack on Camp Ashraf in September, and it is we published our condemnation, and according to us, what happened, the pictures, the evidence that was presented, people with their hands tied and executed on the hospital clinic bench. That's a crime against humanity, and we have condemned it, and we have asked the United Nations to conduct an independent investigation and to hold responsible those who were involved in this crime. When it comes to, you ask why countries don't react the way they should. I really don't know, but as I said, I really don't want to speculate. What is good? What happens in Iraq? There, I think the possibilities to conduct investigations is bigger, because Iraq is not like Iran. In Iraq, you can have United Nations, you can have, Americans can be there, and I think that it is possible to conduct an independent investigation. Why it doesn't happen, I really don't know.
Yes, you can speak. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I'm very thankful what you people are doing for Iran and Iranians. I really do appreciate that. We are talking about the human rights in Iran, which you people are protecting. Are there any activity of protecting Iranians' rights out of the country? Like Iranian refugees in Greece, which they are almost suffering. Young people, they are going to prostitution, boys and girls. I've been there myself, I was witness there, or in Italy and other countries, because I saw even Amnesty International in Athens wasn't very much. Not so many people in all the streets of Athens. They were just suffering. They were really suffering. They had to go to the gay bars to sell the to survive. Is there any activity to helping these people or asking the human rights in Greece, not to the police attacking them day and night and hitting them here and there, and every 3 days they come out of the prison and they go back again there? Is there any activity about this problem? And the second, my wife, she is not Iranian, but she has a very good question. Those Iranians have been involved in war. I mean, they've been in a war against Iraq, and they have escaped from war. Are they have a right to turn back to the country with any problem? Thank you very much.
The first question about the Iranian refugees or asylum seekers, right? Answer to your question is that, but we don't have resources for that. We have barely resources for what we are doing, and I think that probably it's the same with other Iranian human rights groups. I'm not sure whether there is so much activity. I know of human rights defenders who have traveled to, for example, Turkey to assess the situation. We have been doing very small things for some of the refugees who have contacted us, or where we had the possibility to do something for them, but nothing organized. And I think that what could be done, you know, that the issue of we have been talking to some international organization with UNHCR, which is actually the United Nations responsibility. In Turkey, they say that we have the situation in Syria. So many people have come over. We cannot give priority to Iranians, and for us, it's not. In one way you can understand, but on the other hand, I think one would expect that United Nations and the donor countries could, help all the groups. The refugees that come from Northern Africa over the sea to southern Italy. So, issue of asylum seekers is very serious. Unfortunately, the problems are there, and there is not enough help. I cannot, when it comes to Amnesty International, I'm not sure what Amnesty International can do for them, but for example, in Norway, in the cases where asylum seekers who can be directly in danger upon return to Iran, I know that both Amnesty International and also we have been involved, but I agree with you that not enough is done, and what I would suggest is that more people start their own NGOs. We need NGOs that are addressing this specific issue. We have to take the matters in our hands. I didn't understand the question about the people who have been at war with Iraq and who had sought asylum because they didn't want to go with the war in the war against Iraq.
I want to clear the question. People who have been in a war since Iran-Iraq war.
Yes, in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. That was she's asking, in the 80s. And they escaped from the war. And they came to Europe. Are they allowed to go back to the country now, or in any condition?
I think. Whether it is safe for them to go back?
Yeah, exactly.
I really don't know, but I think the Iranian embassy gives an answer. I don't think if they have only left the country because they didn't want to go in war and they haven't been involved in any political activities against, I would assume that maybe they can go back, but I really don't know. I don't know.
Okay, you can go back to our country.
It's about military service. Some say about military service when it was war between Iran and Iraq.
Talk to that gentleman. Yeah, very good answer.
برام خیلی جالب بود که شما مطلبی رو بیان کردید در مورد دو روش اعدامی که در ایران بود که یکی سریع بود و یکی ممکن بود تا 20 دقیقه طول بکشه. همونطور که می‌دونید اتفاقی که الان داره در ایران میفته ما یک نوع اعدام مخفی دیگه هم داریم که در واقع افرادی که در زندان‌ها هستند به واسطه عدم رسیدگی درمانی به اونها در واقع دچار یک مرگ بسیار طولانی و مرگ تدریجی هستند. از جمله این افراد الان کسی که در زندان هست نوید خانجانی هست که بنیانگذار کمیته حق تحصیل در ایران بوده و بسیاری از افراد دیگه. نوع دیگری از مرگ‌ها رو هم در زندان‌های ایران داشتیم که شاید آخریش امیر ابراهیم میرسیاف بود و افراد دیگه هم در زندان‌ها کشته شدن که جزء آمار شما احتمالاً نبوده یا نخواهد بود. برای این دست از افراد چه اقدامی میشه کرد؟ الان فرد 85 ساله‌ای هست که باهایی هست از بیرجند در زندان، جمال‌الدین خانجانی بالای 80 سال سن داره در زندان و قطعاً این افراد احتیاج به درمان دارن و مراقبت‌های درمانی هیچ اتفاقی براشون نمیفته. من فکر می‌کنم وقتی که صحبتی از این موارد نمیشه کم کم گریبانگیر دیگران هم میشه، مثل آقای کروبی که الان 72 ساعت هست که زیر سرم هست. یعنی فکر می‌کنم راجع به این مسائل هم باید صحبت بشه. میخوام بدونم که چه اقدامی شما انجام دادید و چه اقدامی دیگران میتونن انجام بدن.
Shall I translate? Yeah. Okay. اسم شما چی بود؟
Sina.
So Sina says that I mentioned two kinds of executions, one that goes slowly and one that goes fast. But there is another way where prisoners are killed or die in the Iranian prisons, and that's gradual death because they are not getting the medical help by the authorities. He mentioned one example, Navid Khanjani from the Committee of the Right to Education, or Amiry Ibrahim Mirsayaf. Which prison was he from?
He was journalist.
Yes. Yes. Who was in Evin, that people who die as a result of lack of treatment in the prisons. And the question is, why don't are these included in your numbers? My answer is no. They are not included in our numbers because the numbers that I presented in our annual report we have written that these do not include those who are killed under torture, those who are killed in the prisons because lack of treatment, those who have died as in a suspicious way in the prisons or outside. There was a Baha'i actually weeks ago in Bandar Abbas who was shot. And he was killed, and yes, and we haven't included them. We haven't included the porters, Kolbaran, on the border area where they carry equipment over the border and sell them on the other side, and that's how they live. And every now and then, the border guards they shoot them. 150 or more have been killed this way in the past 3 years. We don't do that because this is about the death penalty, but we include them in other reports. For example, we have helped, we have provided information to the special rapporteur, Ahmad Shahid, so that he can include these cases in his reports. And I think, but of course, I think it's very important to be part of this movement, you know. We are not too many, we are never too many, and the human rights violations are so big and vast that I don't think we can actually address all of them, but we should try. I agree with you.
The very last word is for Amnesty.
Yes.
Avant de terminer cette conférence, nous aimerions vous remercier d'être venus si nombreux ce soir. Nous voulons également dire un grand merci à Mahmoud d'avoir accepté notre invitation. C'est un vrai plaisir de l'avoir ici au Luxembourg. Un grand merci également à l'ACAT pour tout leur travail. Merci beaucoup Monique et Michel. Et puis à la fin, tout au fond, au stand d'information, nous avons une pétition pour un prisonnier d'opinion iranien. Donc c'est un prisonnier d'opinion qui se trouve dans un état critique et il a besoin de soins médicaux d'urgence. Nous vous invitons de signer la pétition et d'agir pour les droits humains en Iran. Merci beaucoup.
I would also like to thank ACAT and Amnesty for inviting me. It has been a very, I would say, very important day because every time I think I meet new people where I can see people who can start working with the human rights. It's an important day. So thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you for giving focus to the human rights situation in Iran. That's something that we really miss in these days, and I look forward to work with you in the future. We already cooperate both with Amnesty International, with ACAT, and also with other people who are here, with my Iranian, how do you say, compatriots. I'm very glad that so many of you found your way here with your question, that you show that regardless of where we are, but we care about what is going on 5,000 kilometers away. We haven't forgotten them, and even a single thought helps. But I hope that we can all together do even more, both for people in Iran and anywhere where there is violation of human rights. Thank you very much.